Hello and welcome to the last video of this series dealing with the infrasound of wind turbines and infrasound in general. And in this last video we will talk about how the topic of infrasound is dealt with in media, and also how opponents of wind turbines use the topic of infrasound to fight against wind turbines. Hannah, could you give a summary on how this topic is dealt with?
Yes, so in Germany there are many organizations and citizens initiatives against wind farms, for example Vernunftkraft or Windwarn.com. And the main arguments against wind power are, for example, optics or nature conservation, emissions, meaningfulness, economic aspects, or the lack of citizen participation. And infrasound is not a central topic of these initiatives, but it is always mentioned as a cause for fear of health effects of wind turbines.
Yeah. There is one main study that caused really a lot of trouble because it was cited by so many people that infrasound might really be a cause of illness of people. And that is unfortunately from an official body of the German government, the Bundesanstalt für Geowissenschaften und Rohstoffe. And they had a study already in the year 2004 about the about noise that you cannot hear of wind turbines. Can you explain what are the errors in the study and how they dealt with that?
Yes, so this study was a measurement campaign at wind turbine in summer 2004, and measurements were carried out up to a distance of approximately 2 kilometers from the wind turbine. And afterwards a theoretical model was developed for estimating the sound pressure level emitted by wind turbines as a function of their structural parameters. And the result of the study was that infrasound from wind farms with 12 turbines, each with an output of 600 kilowatt, can only no longer be perceived at a distance of 20 kilometers. And since the beginning of 2020, there were hints for calculation and normalization errors in the evaluation of the sound pressure level of this study. So Baumgart and other authors and also Holzheu, they published that they have the impression that there's an error in the results of the study, but it took since April 2021, since the BGR declared that the sound pressure level in their study contains systematic errors and are 36 decibel too high. And this is the factor 63 in the sound pressure of these wind turbines.
But I think the unscientific thing about that was that this governmental body not just said, yes, we made an error and apologized for it and corrected it. There was a long fight of ignoring and defending their study. And now it was recently even the Federal Ministry of Economical Affairs, Peter Altmaier, who publicly apologized or needed publicly apologize for that study and all the trouble that study caused. And there we can see there was a lot of trouble in this discussion, that even a federal minister took opportunity to apologize for that. And that study, that really caused so much trouble because others always have cited this study as a explanation that infrasound really causes health problems. And accused also other studies that they do errors because they had been reaching different results, but in reality they had been right and the other one was wrong. another problem quite often is that those studies are cited really showing there are health problems, but never saying that the sound pressure levels of those studies are much, much higher than ever we have from wind turbines and also in another frequency range. And maybe a third thing quite often, and I think it has its origin in the United States, is this so-called wind turbine syndrome. That is just not a scientific study where people just had been asked, do you have health problems? And when they answer yes, that was the proof that turbines do cause health problems. So these are the main three errors and results, I think, why it has such a negative meaning about infrasound and wind turbines in public.
Yeah, another point is that opponents of wind power often accuse that averaging of peaks is carried out when looking at measured data. But this is wrong, because as we have learned in a video before, we know that the thirds are calculated by adding up and not by averaging. So the peaks are contained in these thirds. And yeah, it is said that there's a need of research, that long-term studies are missing, poorly documentation about impact on the population and no system for assessment and outdated data. So on this slide we can see some headlines of newspapers about infrasound in German newspapers. And of course these headlines are not representative, but we can see that when it is reported on infrasound, it is often reported in combination with wind turbine, although there are other sources for infrasound. And often it is reported about infrasound as a cause for fear of health consequences. And here you can see, if you just type in infrasound in a Google search, the first results you get are about infrasound and wind turbines. So other sources of infrasound are not taken into consideration in the first results.
And unfortunately, we need to say that also the public television station, the public German television station ZDF, does not really play a good role in this discussion. There is a weekly show on science, and they had in 2018 the title Infrasound, noise that you cannot hear. And also there so many errors had been made. That was not really a good example of science theory.
No, this documentation, Dr. Stefan Holzheu had a very deep look on this documentation on his homepage, and he said that in this documentation, first of all, the wrong study of the BGR was cited, but we have to say that at this point of time, the error of this study was not corrected right now. But other things that happens was that investigations on infrasound are presented in this documentation, but it was not mentioned that all frequencies and sound pressure levels were well above the values of the wind turbines. And additionally, an expert was interviewed, and he said that infrasound is very, very dangerous. But he didn't say any measurement. He didn't show any measurement curves, and his statements were not comprehensive. And also, a very important sentence is cited in this documentation. It says, experts estimate that between 10 and 30% of the population can feel symptoms through infrasound. And Dr. Stefan Holzheu, he tried to find a scientific source for this sentence, but he could not find any. So we can say that they say this sentence, but there are no scientific sources for this sentence.
Yeah. So when we conclude about this science theory, then we can say that all the statements made there are just uncritically adopted. The journalists have not looked for proof of the statements or even talked with people or scientists who have another opinion, another experience. So that was really not a good example of journalism. And when we take into account all those things we have discussed in our videos now, we can say that this film does not show any proof of health risks for humans on wind turbines. When we conclude all what we have said now about infrasound, we could say that infrasound from wind turbines are always much below the perception threshold of humans.
Yes, and there are other emitters that emit significantly higher infrasound levels. For example, driving in a car at 130 kilometers per hour.
Then we can say there are absolutely no proofs that wind turbines cause health risks to humans.
And many studies that are cited are misquoted, or the studies are not scientific but still are cited.
And quite often when people state risks, they never talk about at which frequency it had been measured and which sound pressure levels had been measured. So there's also not the possibility to discuss the results.
And we can say that infrasound is not a central topic for opponents of wind power, but is always in focus when it comes to health effects of wind turbines.
And what makes myself most angry is really that it exists, that people are getting ill when they live close to a wind park. And the reason then quite often is the nocebo effect, that they are just because people tell them you will get ill because of the wind turbines, they finally, because they are afraid of getting ill, finally get ill. So those who warn for the health risk are finally the cause why people are getting ill.
Yes, and of course there's a need for research on the topic of infrasound, because there's a lack of consideration of infrasound in the TA-Lärm, which is the technical instruction for protection against noise to protect the general public from harmful environmental effects. And the combination of infrasound with vibrations and low frequency sound has also been more in the focus of research.
So thank you very much, and I hope with those series of videos we could bring a bit of more clarity in this controversially discussed topic of infrasound. So thank you very much.